We are live. Welcome, everyone, to another live. I'm your host, Christopher Balkaran, folks. I'm covering temporary foreign workers, international students for a very long time. In today's live, I'm going to change and flip the script altogether. I'm talking specifically about medical assistance in, can I say the word DYING? Dying. Yes, medical assistance in dying. It's something that is a policy here in Canada. It's been a policy since 2016, where now the government just released the sixth report on MAID, which I'm going to get into today. And the reason why I've covered this topic before is because I truly believe not enough Canadians actually know about medical assistance in dying. Not a lot of Canadians know about this policy that our government has, number one. And number two, I think a lot of Canadians are surprised to know that Canada, to my knowledge, is the only country in the world with two tracks for MAID. One where death is foreseeable, you have a terminal illness, and the other where death is not foreseeable and you don't have a terminal illness. So we're going to get into all the nitty gritty in this live. But before I do, folks, listen, I know so many of you are watching my lives, commenting, telling me, to do different things, change it up, do different topics, etc. And that you're commenting, you're liking, and you're sharing. I'm noticing that a lot, which is absolutely incredible. I've been doing this for a long time, but I've never amassed this many comments and likes and subscribes before. But what I noticed on my YouTube analytics is that many of you are not subscribed. So do me a favor. It would help me greatly. Hit that subscribe button, like and share this live and other videos and shorts that I've done. Just share my content as far and wide as you can see. That would help this channel and what I'm doing here so immensely. So thank you so much for subscribing and being part of this journey. Tell your friends to subscribe as well. So, folks, today we're going to chat about MAID. It's a topic nobody really wants to talk about, but I know many of you want to talk about it. And so I'm going to do a policy deep dive on the most recent report that came out from the federal government. So, why don't we begin? We're going to begin with a definition of medical assistance in dying. Medical assistance in dying, at a very high level. So many Canadians who are nearing the end of their life because of a terminal illness often find themselves in positions where, their last days are not what they really wanted. They they passed with a lot of suffering. They were not surrounded, say, by their family and loved ones. They didn't have any authority over their last, months, years. And as a result of that, they felt like they were completely at the whim of whatever, their diagnosis was. The pain for many is just excruciating. And many just want that ability to say, I'm done. I tried everything and it's over and I'm at peace with that. And they want to pass with dignity. And that's partially why, based on that and so many other groups advocating for passing with dignity. There's actually a group called Dying with Dignity Canada. And that's what led the government in the mid 2010s, 2014, 15, to start looking at MAID. And that's what led to the government legalizing MAID for practitioners to provide that as an option to patients who are nearing the end of their life, to say this is an option for you, where it's administered by a medical practitioner in a setting, I believe, of the patient's choosing, and it brings a lot of closure to someone's life instead of dying a horrible, painful death. And I think for most Canadians, they see that and they think, okay, like I can kind of understand that. And if especially if they have seen their own loved ones go through it, they're like, "You know what? Maybe there's a better way." And I would have appreciated if my family member had passed in a more um, respectful way. So I think there's no real debate there amongst Canadians. I think Canadians are understanding of that specific application. But then there's this ethical argument to that same track of thinking, right? So if someone is in excruciating pain, are they making the best decisions? If they're going through mental health issues, are they making the best decisions, etc.? There's a lot of debate on the ethics behind MAID, but that's just one issue where people may start questioning things. But Canada, a few years after legalizing MAID, it passed track 2. And track 2 is where death is not foreseeable. Now, it still represents a fraction of all MAID cases, but still, Canada is unique in that sense where you don't have to be suffering from an incurable disease where death is certain. You can select MAID where death is not certain. And this is where a lot of Canadians start questioning, well, what's behind that? What are the ethics behind that? All of us, I'm sure all of us on this live, everyone who is hearing this, you've gone through some stuff in your life, and you recognize that these are episodes, and there are ways where you can get help. I'm not saying every single way is effective, but there are methods you can deploy. So if death is not foreseeable, why would the government legalize track 2? Like what's behind that? And that's what's gotten a lot of people a bit more scared or a bit more skeptical of government intentions behind MAID. Um, it's one thing to say, hey, if you're nearing the end of life and you've got a terminal illness and your pain threshold is really high, or your pain levels are really high and your thresholds are very low, I think most Canadians would understand. But then there's these other aspects to MAID that actually are very concerning. And I think we should all talk about them more openly and not be kind of scared about talking about it. I also think that it's not a foregone conclusion to suggest all Canadians are in favor of MAID. I don't know that to be true. Um, so we'll get into the stats today. A couple things just to note before I get into it. One is MAID disproportionately, and we'll get into the stats to show this, it disproportionately shows a higher level of Caucasian or white Canadians than non. Um, and it also shows that there's more urban, that those with not track 2, those without a foreseeable death, are most likely to be women than men. So just at a high level, that tells us more about some cultural indicators that we should also think about. I raise the race um, aspect because 95% of all MAID cases are amongst the white population in Canada. The white population or Caucasian population is only 71% of our population. So there's an overrepresentation of MAID amongst whites. I bet you not a lot of people talk about this, which is why I want to talk about it. But one could argue, and we've seen this on many MAID cases, that family connections and that sense of community is missing for a lot of people who are selecting MAID in addition to their illnesses. And so this could play a role. So, strong relationships with parents and children and family may play a role in whether or not you select MAID. So we almost can't deny the race element to this. It could be that there are certain familial structures within the white population of Canada that are unique to the white population that other cultures do not experience. Just an assumption on my part, but something that could explain the overrepresentation of MAID amongst white Canadians. This is also true in other jurisdictions that have MAID. California, I believe, also has a higher representation of white people selecting MAID than non-white, despite California being much more racially rich, diverse, if that's what you want to call it. We don't see that in MAID, so similarly, like that in Canada. Um, I also want to say that the overwhelming majority of MAID cases are those who have a terminal illness, mostly those with cancer, mostly those, I believe, in their 70s and 80s, equally split men and women. But it's what's concerning to me is the rate of adoption of MAID. So let's get into it. Okay, folks. So I'm going to just nerd out. You're going to nerd out with me. I'm going to nerd out with you on all things MAID. Now, I had my handy dandy report open, so let's get into it. I had it open and now it's closed. Okay, here it is. Let's get into it. So the first thing I want to share with you is this. MAID provisions by year. Now, I wonder if I can zoom in here so I can, oops, maybe that's too much. Let's see if I can expand this. We're doing this. So I was about to say, tell me if you can see it. Okay, so here we go. Based on previous data from previous reports, there have been 76,475 MAID provisions in Canada since 2016. That's a lot, and we'll get into why that's a lot in a second. It presents the provisions from 2019 to 2024 and the year-over-year growth rate. So I want you to look at this as I scroll down. This is not shown in the 2023 report, by the way. 5,461 in 2019, 7,451 in 2020, 9,842 in 2021. Now, in these 2 years, 2020 and 2021, you could say, oh, maybe like the pandemic had something to do with it, but it still keeps charting up 12,000 by 2022, which is over double just a few years earlier. 14,000 2023, and then 15,767. These are just track one, by the way. But the federal government is very keen to point out that the provisions and rate of growth by year was 36%, 34%, 31%, 16%, and then 6.9%. So they're very keen to show that MAID is dropping in total number. It's not nearly as fast rising as it was. Now, this has been something that I have pointed to several times in early criticisms of Canada's MAID policy. My criticism was simple. It was, if Canadians are truly selecting MAID and they're doing it from truly like they want MAID, then why are the numbers so high? And why is adoption rates so much? Like, would this not be a just more gradual uptake? But it's not. It's actually it's a much more rapid uptake. They don't show the numbers from 2016, perhaps with good reason, because if they were to show the numbers from 2016, you would have seen that it went from just a few hundred, I think 1,000 in the first year, ramping all the way up to 5,500 by 2019. So Canadians as a whole were concerned that this number was growing quite dramatically over a very short period of time. And again, you might be saying, Christopher, well, why? Like, who cares? Why you should care about this is because this is a faster uptake than any country in the world that has implemented MAID. That includes the Netherlands. We're outpacing the Netherlands when it comes to uptake of MAID. So I want to share something with you as well, because I think this is also very important. There we go. This is also very important. So remember when I said that this number was important, the total number of MAID provisions was 15,767 of track 1 and 732 of track 2. So in total, I think it's 16,499 in 2024. So remember that number, because I want to share something with you which will really put that number into better context. And it's this number right here. Top 10 leading causes of death in Canada. So cancer leads the pack at 84,629. Diseases of the heart disease, 57,890. Accidents, 20,597, followed by cerebrovascular diseases, stroke at 13,833. MAID provisions would be the fourth leading cause of death in Canada. Now, I know some statisticians would say, well, Christopher, that is not correct because the majority of the 16,499 had cancer, and cancer is the cause of death, not MAID. And I get that. I truly do. That makes sense. But we have to remember too that this is where ethics gets a bit murky, right? Because a terminal illness, again, I can understand why people are selecting MAID. Like, I get that. But it's very important that we understand MAID as the cause of death, not cancer or any other disease, etc. Why? Because MAID has to be shown as the cause of the actual death. Does that make sense? Like, the actual death of someone who has died of cancer is cancer. The actual cause of death of someone who died as a result of a MAID provision is MAID. Like, it's not cancer. They did not live until cancer ended their life. They lived until the MAID provision ended their life. So some might say this is semantics. I don't think so. I actually think that there's a reason why. Let me get this screen back up. There's a reason why um, MAID is not considered a cause of death. Because, in my opinion, when I am researching MAID and looking at government resources, there's a concerted effort to make sure MAID is not part of causes. It's not thought of as death. You'll see in government documents, if you read the annual reports, they always call it provisions. They don't call it death. So I think that there's a reason why they don't want to show it as a cause of death, because the numbers are stark. Remember, MAID was introduced in Canada in 2016. That's not that long ago, less than 10 years ago, and it's already, if we just look at the numbers, the fourth leading cause of death in Canada. That should be alarming to Canadians because of the rate of adoption, right? The rate of adoption is what should truly concern Canadians. It's not that like I disagree with someone's choosing um MAID, right? Um it's that it's the quickness and the speed at which um um it's happening. And so let me just get I was just looking for um the number in the Netherlands. We'll talk about MAID in a second, but here's an example. Okay, so the Netherlands has had MAID, which they have called it, and which has been historically known as euthanasia, longer than Canada. Okay, they've had it longer than Canada. So I'm gonna share my screen with you and share with you what's going on in the Netherlands. So remember the number in Canada for 2024, it's 16,499. In 2024, the officially reported euthanasia cases in the Netherlands was 9,958, which represented about 5.4% of all deaths. This was a 10% increase from 2023. The most common for the Netherlands was an advanced physical illness such as cancer, similar to Canada, but there was a notable rise in cases for psychiatric reasons, increasing to 216 in 2024. So 9,958. The Netherlands has had euthanasia much longer than Canada, and they have lower numbers of cases. And again, they do show a steady increase, but as you can see, 1.7 to 4.5. So it is going up, but not nearly the rate at which Canada's has been over the past 9 years. Now, again, you might say to yourself, well, Christopher, and this is exactly what the federal government is saying. The federal government is saying that the reason why Canada's um, rates are what they are is we've never had it before. And maybe there's just this pent up demand, which is now playing out in the first few years of its adoption, that so many people had been asking for it. So clearly it's now playing out. I would love to challenge that because, again, when you look at numbers, and remember, going back to the government's narrative, this is why they're showing this. Oh, I can't really show you this graph here, the downward slope, saying like, I think they actually say it up here. Yeah, 16. The rate of see how they say the rate of growth in overall MAID cases has been shrinking since 2019. This graph was not shared in their last year's report. I nerd out about these things. I can kind of spot them a mile away. Um, And, yeah. So it says it right here, actually. Wow, without me even saying anything. While the data suggests that the number of annual MAID provisions is beginning to stabilize, these are the government's words, it will take several more years before long-term trends can be conclusively identified, which is fair. I think that's fair. But, at the very least, we do have about 10 years of data. And we do see the numbers going down, but I would be more skeptical about this decrease, to be honest. Like, such a ramp up. Remember, in the Netherlands, they're showing just a few percentage point increases year over year. Canada has seen 36.8%, 34.8%, 31%, even at 16 and 6.9%, 7%. These dwarf the rises in the Netherlands. I want to pose something else to you. So I did say that if MAID provisions were a cause of death, it would be the fourth leading cause of death in Canada. Um, the other thing I want to pose to you is this. It represents 5.1% of all deaths in Canada, if you can believe that. 5.1%, 1 in 20 of all Canadians, if my math is right. My math's right. Okay. 1 in 20 of all Canadian deaths are through MAID provisions. And I think more Canadians would be surprised to know that. I think that's a surprising fact. And so it's something for us to really think about, and really just mention more and more of. And remember, since 2016, 76,745 people have selected MAID provisions. Okay, so now so that gives you just a high level overview of why MAID exists, why it exists, and why I believe more Canadians should be aware of this because, again, it's the rate of growth since its inception that then poses other like ethical concerns and questions that, if left unanswered, can potentially destabilize the trust Canadians have with our medical institutions. Um, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But I wanted to share with you as well something that is also very interesting, um, because I think, again, Canadians may not know about track two. So let me get my handy dandy table up here, and we're going to get into track two. Now, for those that are not aware, yes, Canada has two tracks to MAID. So let's get into some of the details here. Now, check out this graph here. I'm going to zoom in for you. Um, tell me if you can see it. Haha. I wish we were. I'm so used to saying that at work. Okay. Proportion of individuals receiving MAID across each age group. Just looking at track one, where death is foreseeable, you can see the bulk 75 plus. You know, very rare that you see younger people selecting MAID in track one because death has to be foreseeable. Track two is where death is not foreseeable. So we already see, even though, and I need to make sure this point is clear, track two still represents a very small percentage of all MAID provisions. If we go back to my handy dandy graph, the federal government's. In 2024, only 732 of the 16,000 cases were for track 2. So really want to emphasize that this is a small percentage of all MAID provisions, but still what we see here is generally of those 700 and whatever, I forget the number, higher numbers for younger Canadians, right? 3.7% 18 to 44, 5.2% 45 to 44, 12% 55 to 64 compared to track 1. As you can see, those numbers are much lower. Um, and the highest actually are 65 to 84-year-olds. So 85 plus is still high, but not nearly as high. So very interesting that you see a younger demographic for track 2. Okay. So I want to just mention that. Here's where it gets really interesting. MAID provisions by sex and track. So interestingly enough, more men than women received MAID as a whole. This aligns with provisional data, which shows that 50% of people who died were men, 49% were women. Um, but here's where it gets interesting. More women received MAID. Oops, my my screen is going all over the place here. More women received MAID under track 2, 56.7, so 57% versus 43% men. These percentages are closely reported to those in 2023. However, the gap between men and women has widened significantly from track 1. So if we scroll down here, where's my cursor? Okay, so here we go. You can see it for yourself. MAID provisions by track and sex as a percentage of provisions within each track. You can see it. There's more women selecting track 2 where death is not foreseeable. Very interesting. And the is not they say it's not unexpected, but the findings are consistent with overall population trends where women are more likely to experience long-term health conditions and men experience diseases with a high mortality burden that would be more likely to make their deaths reasonably foreseeable. Very, very interesting data that we see for track 2 when broken down by gender. I just want to also say that I'd like to know more about the ages because the buckets here aren't as detailed as I'd like. Um, because I'd like to know like what ages. I mean, are these really young people um, who get it? Now, let me just back up because there was something else I want to share with you. Sorry, not young people, but people who are younger. Why are they selecting MAID? I'd like that. So if you're like 19 years old and you're going through depression, like and it was approved. Like, how the heck did that happen? Right. So it's very important. I thought I had a graph here. I don't. But it's very important that we understand the data because I think it's so critical for us. Um, it's also very important that we understand track 2 some more. Yes, only 732 deaths are through track 2. So some will say, well, it's a small percentage. Again, relative to the top 10 leading causes of death, it's still very high. And we should always just remember that. Remember, if MAID was a cause of death, it would be number 4 in Canada. Just put that in perspective. Um, and so I think it's very important that we understand that. A couple other stats I want to share with you on track 2. Um, 34% of track 2 recipients had been living with their condition for over 10 years. These are people with longer term disabilities, potentially chronic illness, degenerative conditions. Um, and so they're opting for MAID even though death is not foreseeable. But do you think that many Canadians understand this? I don't think so. And again, I think it's very important that we understand the full picture of MAID. We understand that sometimes people are going through things and they may select MAID without knowing that this is an episodic moment in their life. I don't mean to belittle someone's suffering, And who am I, obviously, to say that, oh, you should just like suck it up, buttercup. Like, that's not what I'm trying to say. But what I am saying is that the government has a very important role to play when it's offering MAID and someone they know is going through an episodic moment in their life. Does that make sense? Like, it's one thing if you're going through an episodic moment in your life and you decide to end it on your own terms using your own objects or whatever to do so. Like, that is your right. I mean, it's not right really, but it is like it's not a criminal. It's not criminal to decide to do that and to go through with it. Like, there's no criminal case against that, right? But when the government says that if you want to do that, we will provide you the provision to do so, the government should come under a lot more scrutiny because the person might actually be just going through an episode in their life. And where does the responsibility begin and end in that case? Now, there's something I want to share with you. I had all these bookmarkers, and now I don't see them anymore. Um, there was something. Yes, okay. This is what I want to share with you. Whew. I'm so glad I found this because I was like losing my mind for a second. Okay, this is what I want to share with you. So let me share my screen. Now, remember what I said. People are going through episodes in their life. They could be, loss of a family member, loss of finances, loss of physical abilities, and they may be going through a lot of depression as a result. In those moments, in the most vulnerable moments, people may be selecting MAID because they don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, if that makes sense. And so they want to end it on their terms. But again, if the government is providing this, then the government should understand that person is going through an episode in their life, and the g- as part of a government provision, they should be much more judicious in how they approach it. Okay, here's an example. This is from the report. It's on page 30. Um, Perceived burden on family and caregivers, or self-perceived burden. The perception of being a burden to others is a common feeling amongst those with serious illness. This is often referred to as self perceived burden and is defined as a multidimensional construct arising from the care recipient's feelings of dependence and the resulting frustration and worry, which then may lead to negative feelings of guilt at being responsible for the caregiver's hardship. Researchers have highlighted the clinical importance of self perceived burden given the distress and suffering it causes. Some have also questioned the potential role that self perceived burden may play in a person's MAID request and the ways in which it may expose broader deficits when it comes to providing adequate home care for caregivers. Um, so, we're going to get into this in a little bit more detail. But I say all of that because it's so important when we are looking at MAID that we remind ourselves that there is the perception of what people are going through and how they're internalizing it, if that makes any sense. So, an example I have is this. It's like there was a study done on quadriplegics. Typically, I didn't know this, but a lot of quadriplegics are younger men usually, or younger people. Um, Doing, like, extreme sports and got into an accident and, paralyzed from their neck down, waist down, and many had suggested, like, "Okay, like, it's over. I don't wanna live like this, so I'm done," you know? And it was very much like I gave up, and, um, the after sustained focus groups, mental health, initiatives, talk therapy, etcetera, at the end of, like, 90 days or something, like, the feelings of suicidal ideation had completely vanished for this focus group, and they were more likely to say that they experienced feelings of joy and happiness, etcetera, not the other way around. And so I say all of this because we know that there are interventions that clinically can work, um, from a mental health perspective, and we can debate, mental health as a term, but that can restore one's sense of joie de vivre for life through different means. And it doesn't have to be like talk therapy and focus groups. But all of that said, there's a malleability to the brain that is well documented in the psychological literature. Ancient cultures have known this for thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, that there's this malleability to how our mind interprets what its environment is going through. And if you read like the ancient studies on this, you'll find stories of people who, had cancer. Cancer's been around for forever. But you'd never know it living with them, talking to them, because they had such a deep joie de vivre or joy for life. And the same is true for a lot of people going through like sages, people who've been through things but were able to see the other side. I mean, if you think of every epic, whether it's the Bible, the Bhagavad Gita, the Quran, the Torah, like every book has stories of this like insurmountable odds are stacked against this person, still they rise over it. So anyways, all this to say, not to get too esoteric, but there are methods by which people can deploy to change how their mind interprets their environment. And so if someone is nearing the end of their life and it's terminal illness, again, I don't think most Canadians have a concern, but when death is not foreseeable, that's when I think Canadians have a concern. Because again, it's publicly available, it's a public provision. And so if someone is feeling like they don't want to continue living because of their own perceived burden on others, then suddenly we get into the position of, are we providing MAID to someone because of their own perceptions of themselves, right? Like they're depressed, they're going through something, they have a chronic illness. Now they perceive that they're a burden on others. So now they're selecting MAID. So we're giving them MAID because of their own perception. Like, okay, that's kind of weird because everyone, but by that, then I would argue there should be a sliding scale. Like, by and large, then what qualifies them and not someone else, right? Like, I don't know. It gets kind of weird when we start looking at how someone perceives themselves in relation to others and their burden. And we go through with MAID because the perception someone has of themselves and whether or not they're an asset or liability to society is malleable. You can change that. You can change that with sustained interventions. That can change and change dramatically. Um, we know this. The research shows this, and you don't even need to research. Like, try it out in your own life. But that's where things are getting very murky. People are choosing MAID not because of pain, but because they feel like they're a burden. And this is where it gets very, very dicey. I'll share with you another stat, because this is also very interesting. We're nerding out on this together, folks, but it's so important that we nerd out on this. All right. Um, the nature of suffering. The third element of the grievous and irremediable medical condition eligibility criterion is that the person is experiencing, quote, enduring physical or psychological suffering that is intolerable to them and that cannot be relieved under conditions they consider acceptable, right? So this is where, again, it gets very awkward and weird because, like, what I consider insufferable may not be what you consider as insufferable or, sorry, intolerable. And this is where it can get very ethically challenging. So here we go. This figure outlines the sources of suffering. Before I show you the numbers, the loss of ability to engage in meaningful activities was the most commonly reported source of suffering among MAID recipients, followed by loss of ability to perform activities in daily living, um, such as self-care tasks, eating, drinking, dressing, moving around, and maintaining personal hygiene. Um, so remember, okay, so before I share the stats, remember when I said that many Canadians would be sympathetic to someone who's over 80, terminal stage cancer, death is foreseeable, and they say, "You know what? I don't wanna die in this very horrible way. I wanna die with dignity. I'd rather my family be around me. I'd rather be at my home, in the house that I built or lived in most of my life. I'd like that to be my last chapter." I think, again, people would feel great about that, or maybe they wanna die by the lake or the places they used to visit, like, I get that. That makes so much sense. Um but if they have terminal 4-stage cancer and they interpret that they are a burden on their family, they're a burden on the healthcare system, they're a burden on the nurses, they're a burden on everyone else. They can't wash and clean themselves, they can't get up and walk. That's why I'm selecting MAID. That's a very, very different conversation. That's a conversation where I say, hang on, there's other people here with terminal 4, and obviously not in any way disrespecting people with cancer. But what I'm saying is that if we're gonna select MAID because of your perceptions of how you are a burden on others, we can work with that. You are not a burden on anyone. You have a terminal illness, and there are certain motor functions that you will not be able to perform like you did without it. So there is a healthcare system set up to help you. Don't feel like you're a burden. And again, there are various interventions that can help with someone's perception about themselves and how they relate to their diagnosis. So again, I'm going to share with you this helps tell the story. Sources of suffering related to the person. Okay. Reported nature of suffering by track. Now, I want to say, okay, so the light blue, if you can see that, is track 1, and then track 2 is a dark purple. Now, I want you to just look at this. These are really high numbers, right? But like 32% loss of bodily functions, loneliness, 44% amongst track 2, 21% amongst track 1. Track 1, inadequate control of other symptoms or concerns about it, 57%, 43% amongst track 2. Where it gets really interesting, excuse me, loss of ability to engage in meaningful activities, 95%, 97%. Loss of ability to perform activities of daily living, 85%, 85%. Loss of independence, loss of dignity, emotional distress, anxiety, fear, existential suffering. If you notice, and I want to make sure I'm reading this correctly, but if you notice, you'll notice that the reported nature of suffering isn't the diagnosis. I don't see that here, right? Maybe it's under emotional distress, anxiety, fear, and suffering there. Sorry, I can't highlight the actual rows. Um, so like it's not the actual diagnosis. How crazy is that? Right? It's everything associated with the diagnosis, which leads me, I wonder if they talk about this. Uh, okay. So I want to make sure I'm doing this right. Types of suffering. I don't know what that's in relation to. It says it has numbers 1 to 9, but I don't know what's this in relation to. Um, anyways, yeah, okay, and then we get back into isolation and loneliness. In its 2024 Aging in Canada survey, the National Institute on Aging found 2 in 10 of people in Canada aged 50 or older were very lonely, 40% were somewhat, and 43% were at risk of social isolation. Isolation and loneliness are known to have serious impacts on physical and mental health, quality of life, and longevity. Some media reports have expressed concerns about the extent to which isolation may drive a person's MAID request. Um, so going back to my assumption, nature of suffering by track. I'm sorry I'm pausing so much, folks, but I am just amazed here that again, to me, it's not the diagnosis, and that to me is the concern, right? So like, say you were diagnosed with cancer and the doctor said, "Oh my goodness, like it's stage 4. I keep saying stage 4, and you have very limited time left. So, make funeral arrangements, talk to your loved ones. Like, I could understand why that would cause emotional distress, anxiety, fear. Maybe that's the number there. But when I look at this graph, I don't see the actual diagnosis. Instead, it's the loss of ability to engage in meaningful activities, to perform activities in daily living, independence, dignity. This could be it. Emotional distress of suffering. That could be it. But the others, like, it's just so wild to me. Why is it wild to me? Because all of this we know through psychosocial work can be treated. It can be treated and treated meaningfully. Again, I'm not trying to say everybody go to therapy because you're going to be 100 times better. I'm not trying to say that. I'm not trying to preach, and be all preachy about it. But what I am saying is, if you go to your doctor and you tell your doctor that you want to end it all, et cetera, because you're going through something, I presume, because doctors do take an oath, that their goal is trying to save your life, right? Like, that is their goal. So if you ever do say that, and I would say, perhaps, assumption on my part, people who are nearing the end and are going through real depression probably aren't going to their doctor telling them that. They're probably going to do it, or at least attempt it without many people knowing. But if they do, I would assume that the doctor would be the one saying, "Hey, listen, there is help, and there's a variety of methods that you can deploy." And again, we know about neuroplasticity, and your brain can change in different ways. So I'm at the 46-minute mark. I've been talking about MAID for a long time. Now, I want to end this live because there's a lot more to get through in this 96-page report. um, because I haven't even talked about MAID practitioners and delivery, and that should be my next video. So stay tuned for that if you haven't. But I wanted to talk about a personal example with me. Now, I haven't gone through a depressive episode. I've experienced like bad thoughts, of course, like everybody, but I wouldn't say that I've had depression. But I have had anxiety. And one thing that's gotten me through it, and knock on wood, like, I really haven't had high anxiety since, and this was about 6 years ago, like around the time of the pandemic. But what helped me through that was a doctor. When I had an anxiety attack, and I'll never forget this because could have gone two ways. I had an anxiety attack. I went to the hospital. I didn't like For those who've never experienced an anxiety attack, you feel like you're going to pass away. Like, you feel like your heart's beating out of your chest and that, like, it's the end, and all these fearful thoughts are just racing in your brain, and it's very scary. Um, and it's very, like, overwhelming because you don't know what to do. Your entire mind is just convinced that you're gonna die. Like, it's pretty wild to actually say that, but it is what happens. Well, at least what happened with me. Anyways, I went to the hospital, and, I'm sitting in ER, and I'm calming down, and, I finally get to see the doctor, and, he tells me, he's like, "Hey, have you been, like, taking care of yourself?" I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Well, like, all the tests are fine. Like, your heart rate's fine, your blood tests are fine, you know, there's no high anything, like, you're good. Like, so what's going on?" And I said, That's weird. Like, I feel like my heart's beating out of my chest." And he's like, "I mean, it's slightly elevated, but it's not like anything crazy. It's probably because, like, you rushed in here." Anyways, he said to me, he's like, "Okay, so clearly this is anxiety," his words. And he's like, I can give you two things here. I can write you a prescription right now for Prozac or, like, anti-anxiety medication. Um, I can write to you. You can go downstairs and it'll calm you right down. But chances are you're going to be hooked on that stuff whenever you're feeling anxious, and you're not going to address the root cause of what's going on. So, have you thought about, like, meditation or spirituality? And I thought, huh, how interesting that the doctor would tell me this. And, he's like, you may wanna look into that." This was, like, 6 years ago. I had meditated before off and on, but I hadn't done it, like, regularly. And I'll tell you, like, I started deploying a lot of different tactics at first, from journaling to meditative walks to being surrounded with family, and all of those things helped 100%. Meditation really helped me. I also did therapy and did all types of things. And again, knock on wood, 6 years later, I haven't had these racing thoughts. And not only that, I've made conscientious efforts to make every thought meaningful in my life, to remove bad thoughts from my mind, to remove negative thoughts from my mind, and it's transformed how I approach every day. All of this to say, again, I'm not preaching a sermon here, um, but all of this to say, the mind is malleable. You can change your mind through daily, consistent action. And it's not for me to say that everyone should do this. It's similar to working out. It's similar to eating healthy. Like, it's not like you wake up one morning and you're totally fit and you feel great. It's over sustained periods of focus on what you're putting into your body and focus on exercise and all the good things that you're doing to support your body. And the same is true with meditation. It's what the ancients always say, to practice every single day. And practice doesn't always have to be sitting in a room by yourself meditating. Practice can mean you're in a situation at work or in your family and people are getting under your skin. Are you going to respond in a negative way or in a positive way? That's also practice. And so I say all of this because the research and the literature is clear as mud when it comes to the ability for you to change your mind. And ancients have known this for millennia, and we're only catching up to it now with the science. So if the government is going to provide MAID on the basis of someone going through an episode in their own lives that we know can be changed through interventions that are proven and, like, evidence based, why would the government still provide MAID? Would be my question. Why? Especially as we saw in the causes, not the causes, in the perceptions of the person, like, I can't do meaningful activities. I can't lead a healthy life. I can't do the things I love. I'm a burden on others. Like, we start piecing together why people are selecting MAID. Again, I didn't see on that list that I got a diagnosis and therefore I want MAID because the end is going to be very brutal and I don't want to go through that. That, to me, I'd be like, okay, I kind of get that. But instead, what we see is that it's all these other psychosocial reasons: loss of dignity, loss of doing daily, daily tasks, feeling like you're a burden on others. We know through different methods that can change. And if the government knows that that can change, why would they still offer MAID? That's the question I have, because there is a deep responsibility that the government has through the Canada Health Act to preserve life. That's the oath that practitioners take. And so I'm going to leave you with that today as part of this live. Why would government still provide MAID knowing that the top reasons people are selecting it is due to psychosocial, and we know the brain is malleable? Very interesting topic. It's going to dominate all of my YouTube videos this week. So if you're liking this content, like, share, subscribe. Folks, I've said this before, 97% of you who find my content, who like it, who comment on it, who are DMing me, you're not subscribing. So hit that subscribe button, folks. Help me out. Help me build this out. This is the place right here. This channel right here, YouTube, this channel that I have is the place on YouTube where Canadians can have these fulsome policy discussions, that our media isn't talking about, that our government's not talking about, with good reason. They don't want to get into the nitty gritty, because if they did, it would open up a Pandora's box. So, like, share, subscribe. Thank you so much. I really hope you enjoyed this live. I'll catch you in the next one. Take care, everyone. Have a great rest of your weekend.